Hello, hello, hello.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, the music stopped playing, and I was like, "What's going on? Did I mess it up?" Because my mama was blowing my phone up. Jinkies.
What's poppin'? What's poppin'? Are you in South Carolina?
No, I'm in Georgia.
Okay. Well, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody. It's a big sports day, so we're not gonna take too much of your time. But we have some special guests, and we want to go ahead and um let them, say who they are. So just unmute and give the audience an introduction.
I'll start us off. I'm Myles Ehrlich. I've been covering the WNBA since 2019. I write for Winsider, and I've written for a couple of different outlets. And I also host a podcast. And I'm based in New York, so mostly on the Liberty market, but I kind of follow the whole league too.
Period.
I can
Jeanette?
go. So, I am Jamie Steyer Johnson. I'm in kind of a different spot. I work with Iowa State women's basketball. I'm the radio analyst, so in college, obviously, and then I cover a lot of the Big 12. So then I continue to cover a lot of those players when they go on to play professionally, both Iowa State players and the Big 12 as a whole. I work with the 10-12 network. We have a podcast cover a lot of the league. So, but yeah, a lot of broadcast there for me.
All right, and last up.
Oh, I can go. I am Nekias Duncan. Been covering the W full time now the past 2 seasons. Did some writing for basketballnews.com while I was there. Currently doing some freelance writing for WNBA.com. Also am a co-host of the Dunker Spot podcast. It's an NBA and WNBA podcast. I think that'll do it.
Oh, that is what's up. We've been talking about this was a spaces we've been talking around, considering doing for a long time. But a conversation Miles and I had on the timeline during the WNBA really sparked my interest in wanting to have this space. So if there are other media members in the space in the room and feel prompted to respond to any of the things that we discuss or any of the things we get into, you're welcome to do so. As always, if you're in the crowd and you have questions about things that we're discussing, use the chat feature. But this space was definitely meant to kind of get the media perspective about things that pertain to how fans and or players view their role in the space. So Lo's going to kick us off with the first question, and we're just going to move from there.
All right, what's up, y'all? So let's go ahead and get started because we don't want to take up nobody time too much, okay? So our first question is, how would you guys describe the state of women's sports media like right now? How do you feel about it? I know in its ebbs and flows, so what are some positives and negatives of women's sports media for you right now? Whoever wants to start can take it.
I'll jump in. I think that media, taking a step back from women's sports media as a whole right now, and that's not even just sports, but it's terrifying. These last couple of weeks, we've seen some huge outlets fire a whole bunch of people, and we know, I believe everyone that's up here right now, we're all in the independent space too. So that's been even more difficult because we're trying to, for women's sports, all in our own ways, create coverage that doesn't already exist or doesn't exist to the level that we want it to.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that in the last couple of years, we've seen tangential progress in that these conversations are happening, but they're also not happening at a large level, which is why we're all taking this on, and that's just not okay. And it's undeniable that women's sports are growing, so there's that frustration there. But we're also aware that there is somewhat of a bubble, for better or worse,
Mm-hmm.
when we're on social media, right? We have the people around us that are sharing our work, that are really interested, that have found us all in some way, because they want there to be the coverage that doesn't otherwise exist. So I think it's positive that like all of us have seen growth in our own small platforms, but it's definitely, there are lots of disappointments there too, that it A, has to get to that point, and B, that we're largely doing this for free. And I think that that's part of the conversation that we're going to have today too, is that these opportunities just don't exist, and there aren't enough. And I'm saying this also as a white dude in women's sports media. I shouldn't be at the front of the line for any of these jobs also. So that's also, these jobs just don't exist enough. So there are lots of things that can get better. And right now it's on all of us that we're trying to get it to a point that we want it to be at.
Period.
Yeah, I'm kind of right there with you on that. You know, I'm a white woman. My mom has coached at Iowa State for a couple decades, so obviously had a little bit of an in there. So that definitely helped me get working there. But at the end of the day, what I do is a glorified hobby for as far as compensation goes. You know, I'm not complaining. I'm in an extremely privileged position where I can do that, and I could afford to do that and still live my life. But I put a lot of time, I put a lot of effort into the work that I do, the coverage I do, and most of it is for my own interest, frankly. It's not for a platform, it's not for pay, it is because I care about it. And I know that ultimately a lot of it can do good for the people I'm covering, the places I'm covering, but it's not doing a whole lot career-wise for me. And then the other thing that I think about is the amount of responsibility that comes with the level of coverage these teams get and these players get, where if you're talking about a story, if you're covering someone, you very well may be the only person doing so. And so there's not going to be that point counterpoint that we see a lot in the men's side. And so you have to be even more conscientious of the way you talk about things, which I think we're going to get to, and what you say about people, teams, whatever. And so it can feel like a lot of responsibility while you're also maybe not getting as much as you would be getting out of it if you were to be doing the same work on the men's side. So it is a really extremely tough balancing act.
Go for it.
Oh, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome, cool. So I just wanted to drop in and say hey. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Meghan Hall. I work with USA Today, and you've probably seen me, tweeting about the Dream or things like that. So I started covering WNBA last year on a freelance basis, and one of the things that I learned from just covering the Dream, but obviously covering other teams as well, is just the responsibility that someone else also mentioned but responsibility to tell stories in a proper way. And I think a lot of that comes with the fact that, like, I ran into someone and they were like, hey, what outlets are covering the games, and I had to kindly tell them, I'm like, at least here in Atlanta, if it's not a big game like the Dreamer playing the Aces or something like that, you're not going to see too many big outlets out there. It's a lot of the smaller outlets, like me, like for example, I said I covered it freelance. I did it through my own outlet, so I have my own website that I was covering through, and the Dream were willing to do that because they needed the coverage. And that's the sad reality where you're at, because there are way too many stars on that team for people not to be covering it. You know what I mean? And the thing is, the Dream are one of the more media friendly teams, that I've had the pleasure of covering. Coach Wright is really, really gracious in answering questions, and so are the players. And so to me, that was super eye opening, not being in the industry, and then now, of course, being in the industry full time, realizing that there are way too many stories that just we just don't hear enough of. And that really got reflected to me when I interviewed Jewel Lloyd earlier this year, and her response to me was, "Hey, I'm trying to be more personable to the media and build up a relationship with them because there are stories that need to be told." And she mentioned to me about just, hey, I'm not just a jersey, I'm a person too, if that makes sense. So I think it's an ongoing thing that we certainly need more people that are willing to cover these players and do so in an authentic light.
I think I want to be a little provocative here, because we when I started out, it was like, what media member can take the most beating to persevere into where we want to be? And in women's sports, there's just no money, so we're taking the beating for no cost at all. And I just remember, I love how y'all mentioned the gatekeeping with the agents and other things, because I broke a story in 2018. The reason why I tell feel good stories and things like that is like, when I broke a story in 2018 and an agent didn't want me to break that, I got blacklisted. And so I had to become independent. I had to work my way up in a social media landscape. Those of you who don't know, I started off as a writer. And it was just, a lot of people can't rely on the feel good stories because it's not sustainable. It's not great for the whole landscape. But I was forced into that, and grew to love it, truly love it. But when I got my sources, checked them 3 times, 4 times, I was often discredited when I was first starting out. And what I've been able to do is go the social media route, which isn't the same skill set at all. It's a completely different job. And having to blend that together with journalism to make a product that will penetrate the field that has the money, so that they can see that it's worth investing in women's sports. But I can't imagine people who don't have the backing. Well, I don't have the backing anymore, but who don't have the backing of a major company and doing this for just pure joy and pure bare minimum to continue to persevere through the beating that it really takes to be successful in this field.
Yeesh. Guys,
I was just gonna say, it won't hang here too long. Like, to get back to the original question, like, I would describe it as, in my experience, it's been a very welcoming experience. Hopping into the more so W side, but college, but women's basketball in general, and hopping in that media space. Like, again, obviously can't speak for anybody else, but like, I've been very appreciative of just how open people have been. Kind of inviting me into the space, and as I've done my own W coverage and getting into the X's and O's and stuff like that, like, I've been able to find a niche there. But to bounce off of what everyone else has said, like, it is difficult to build it out without having the backing and not having, really just not having the financial support to do and tell the stories that need to be told. And like, I recognize that I'm operating from a level of privilege because basically what I do on the NBA side funds what I do on the W side. Like, whenever I'm in Vegas to cover an Aces homestand or something like that's coming out of my own pocket.
wow.
And so like I recognize that I'm lucky to be able to do that, but ultimately I would love for the space to get to a point to where more of these major outlets really invest in people that love the sport.
You know,
Aside,
I
so
was gonna say I would agree with you in that. I think that was probably one of my things that I didn't realize until I got into the industry. Like, there isn't enough coverage. And so when I got to, For the Win, I was like, hey, what's our WNBA coverage look like? And they were like, well, we don't really do a whole lot, but if you want to write on it, like, go for it. So I did, and now I've kind of become like the resident person on staff to write, all of our WNBA coverage, and have started getting into college basketball too. And I would say the joyous part about that is I was able to use like my dream knowledge, but also like I landed on the league's radar, and they hit me up and was like, hey, we heard you've been writing about us. Let's talk. But I wouldn't have gotten that opportunity if not working for USA Today. So I try to use that to my advantage, that I do work for a big outlet, and get there's an audience there. And I think that's the other thing, is like, people don't believe that there is, which is wild to me. But I want to be part of the group that kind of eliminates that stigma, that like that people don't watch women's sports, or there's not enough there, because there certainly is. And we do need way more people to tell, like I said, to tell these stories.
Wow. So I think this kind of segues into the next question, and I think it'll also give you guys a little bit more room to speak on your experiences. But as we know, each of you take on different roles in your approach to covering the league. Like, all media isn't the same. So, in the way that you choose to cover the league, in your vein, um, can we be critical What do you believe your role is as a media member, and should the coverage always be positive?
I could jump in quickly on this one. I think because I'm coming from it with an X's and O slash film lens, I think it's easier for me to be critical. But even then, I kind of recognize I can't. I have to be a little bit more careful with the audience that I have. Again, most of that has been curated from the NBA side, and so like I can't. If I see like a random play in a third quarter, like I can't drop a joke as easily as I may want to, just because I don't know who's going to try to hop on that and what their intent is, and like I don't want to put anybody in harm's way on stuff like that. So like in that regard, like that requires some discernment. That requires just a tighter selection of words and stuff like that. But overall, like yeah, I'm able to say, hey, this defense isn't great. This offense wasn't ran well, etc. So I haven't had any issues there. I haven't had anybody like reach out and say, hey, why are you talking about my client like this or anything like that. And I think overall, like you should be able to be constructive about the sport without worrying about that kind of backlash.
I'll agree with that. And I think that the advantage that I have as a writer is that I can, obviously not right now in this moment, but I can usually take time to formulate thoughts and to back things up with data. So if I am being critical, I can say, oh no, it's not me just saying this. Here are the numbers. Here's why this is why this makes sense to me. Um, I don't think that I think I understand that there's a conversation about women's sports being treated with kid gloves, and that's something that I've heard before about we should be able to bring that same criticism or that same level of not everything needs to be positive. But I think it's also worth noting that it's such a smaller slice of the pie
Mm-hmm.
that giving that equal that 50% positive, 50% negative, it can be drowned out when so much of the outside noise is already negative just because of what the United States is as a country towards women and towards black women especially. So I don't know that I feel like I need to find a way to be negative. Um, but I do think it's important to give a full glimpse of the conversation as well, and that other people could have different roles than me in that space. So if I'm able to tell stories or bring a perspective, I can bring a more positive lens and understand, okay, this is a bias I'm choosing to have, is to look at this more positively. But I think it's really helpful when conversations don't all do that as well.
I fully agree with you, Miles. Like I think that um Eh, yes. So there are different jobs within the landscape. So for me, I'm a storyteller. I open up the space for the players to take the stories where they want to take it. That's what my show is with the W. It's off top. They just have candid conversation, and my job is not to analyze the game. Um, and I love when you, Miles, you said you preface it with saying, "I'm choosing to have this bias." As long as the bias is acknowledged before you present the content, I don't see an issue with coming to it with a positive angle. And what I love on the adverse side is that people have the space to be critical. And those who know what the criticism could be like, you can have consequences to that criticism, right? If you call something out and people don't like, especially people in power, that can deny you the access that you might need especially as an independent outlet. That's where we need to figure out how to accept criticism, especially as the women's sports scales up, and then also allow space and not take away from the positive stories too. A lot of people are sick of the positive or positivity because they think that it doesn't give a scope of things, but it's just a completely different thing. It's not X's and O's. It's storytelling. So I think that there needs to be a healthy balance, a healthy dialogue, which is what you all are doing right now. Of saying, hey, what needs to be done so that the gatekeeping isn't there, so that people who aren't as um, strongly backed by the community can give their opinion without running scared of denial of access.
Yeah, I mean, I'll hop in and say that I've tried to be honest in all of my work. That's the number one thing that you'll probably get out of me is I have to be honest. If I'm not doing my job, if I'm not honest, so sometimes that you got to cover tough topics. I will say I've had to learn over the last season or two. Sorry, y'all, if y'all hear a dog in the background. We've got a puppy at home. But I've had to learn over the last season or so with covering teams is how to ask the tough questions, right? If you've ever watched Tanisha Wright in Atlanta, she is a tough cookie. And that was my first welcome to the WNBA moment was, asking Coach Wright questions. But I've learned to do so in a way that is conducive. And then the other thing is you've got to build the relationships with the people. If you're not building the relationships with the people, you're not going to be able to ask the tough questions, right? And get the answers that you want. So I don't feel like, you should limit yourself in asking or writing the tough things. But I feel like you need to do the work to get there, right? It's one thing if you've never talked to this person, you just write, what you feel. It's another thing if you've built a relationship with them and now you're being critical of them because you know that they appreciate, you being honest. So I think there's a way to do that. I think, honestly, it starts for me. This is where I see it. It starts before they even get to the WNBA. You see it now with the way Angel Reese was covered. You see it with Caitlin Clark. You see it with any of those bigger names, Cameron Brink, Paige Beckers, anybody that that you probably see as a big star right now. It starts before they even get to the league, in my opinion, and how we speak about these players and how we craft their stories.
And I'll jump in here just to give a very kind of different perspective. I don't disagree with any of you, but my position is very different in that I am a contractor. I work specifically with a school, with a team. And so I have trouble describing exactly what I do and what I consider myself sometimes, but it is very much a hybrid of like a journalism and a PR. And so I think there's absolutely space for critical coverage. That is absolutely something that should exist, needs to exist, but it's not something that's going to come from me. It is not my job, really. I have a kind of dual purpose of covering a team, but also to a point promoting them. And so, I think that it's totally valid to do so, but especially for people that work in conjunction with a team or a league as a whole, there's sometimes this perception that it's like selling out to not be critical and to not touch those stories sometimes, but it's really got to be an understanding of, okay, what is this person's actual duty? And so when, for instance, Ari, you talk about what you do and being a storyteller, like if people were to come at you and say, well, but you're completely ignoring this story that is, has everyone in an uproar. It's just like, well, maybe that's not within the person's wheelhouse to cover. And so that actually can present a lot of challenges too.
I think it's beyond the wheelhouse part, right? It's like we go back to the first question. We're doing what we can with what we have. We can't be everywhere. And a lot of people hold the weight of every journalist to everything because there's only like 10 of us in the space, right? And so we can have the agency over ourselves to say this is the type of story I want to cover for not only the compensation that's being presented, but the mental health aspect of it alone. Like, if you're gonna tell these provocative stories, you got to be ready for the backlash. And to be honest, everybody ain't built like that, and that's okay. And everybody's not hired for that, and that's okay.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, all of you were talking about, that relationship building. So I know, for instance, we've seen a situation kind of play out this past summer where we know a journalist who's always there and who's, doing what she's supposed to do, but she definitely received some backlash for kind of not being PR and only promoting positive. She was being a journalist. She was being honest. She was doing a job. To my knowledge, she wasn't being rude. So how do you handle that as a journalist? You're there, you're asking questions, and you feel like you've done your due diligence, and you might get this random backlash that you kind of didn't expect. And you kind of kind of catches you off guard. How do you handle things like that?
You keep being you.
Period.
I mean, people love hate clicks, right? Like they love the controversial things. They love the, oh my gosh, yes, please say this thing that I've been thinking. But you got to be you. Like you have to be you at all times. Like nobody can be you better than you is always my thought. And if being you is what got you there, and and you were authentic the whole way, like let people say what they're gonna say. Because at the end of the day, like I think every single person in this space, I started following because before I even got in the industry, because I was like, hey, they know what they're talking about and they're themselves. And one of the best things that you can do is, of course, be yourself, and people will see that. I see Mark is in the. I think he's in the listeners, but Mark is one of the first people, literally the first person I met when I started covering the Dream. And I'm asking questions because I don't know, because I'm brand new. And he was so kind and so nice, and he was just himself, right? And that helped me be myself. And I think that you need more of that within the space. Let people be themselves, because there's too many folks out here who are shady. And in my opinion, it comes out in your work. Like, I don't care what you say to anybody else. Like, I can tell it when I read your work.
I was about to say I tried to invite Mark up here, but he didn't want to talk to us. But now
You know, Mark be funny acting. He be
Mark,
funny acting.
I mean, Mark is Mark.
He probably
If you
calling
know,
us
you
old
know.
as he's muted.
What?
You know.
I was
Listen,
walking my
Mark called me
dog.
broke once, so
Don't put it on the dog. Don't put it on the dog. While you're here, I know you invited Mark. Can you invite? I don't know if Lo wants to speak. Laureen, she
yeah.
was one of the ones who was back in like 2014 covering the Liberty when there was only like 3 people there, and she really helped
Yeah,
me get into the space. So I don't know. Beyond the W is
I
what I don't
can't. What's her at?
at LOIRA_BTW, and she probably has a great perspective because she
Oh,
has
here.
withstood the test of time with no resources at all.
I see her. I see her. I'm inviting her.
While she's coming up, I wanted to ask you guys. So again, we all know that you all are here, and as you guys have spoken about, because you love the game, you want to help the game grow. For a lot of you, this is a passion project. So, how do you guys deal with like the balance between I want the league to grow, I see all these things that are limitations to the growth that impact even my ability to help growth, and so a lot of fans see things like, the Kenny Carter situation a few years ago, and how that did not get its just due in terms of no one knew what actually happened behind the scenes. So we all got this like one-sided narrative about what happened to her, and now we see that it's kind of resulted in her not being able to stay in the league consistently. How do you guys see this unwillingness to accept negative press in the league as a challenge for its growth? Because as you guys have said, even some of the positive press is a challenge for growth. So what do you guys see in that in that conversation?
Well, I will say, as again, someone who is not going to be maybe covering those stories as much myself, but as someone who gets maybe a lot of the background information that may not see the light of day yet, may never see the light of day, and then I have to see the way that it's covered and know, okay, this is privileged information. This isn't something I'm going to be breaking. It is so important to have people who can treat stories sensitively. A lot of them, I think, are in the spaces right now where even if there's something that can have a negative slant, where you can trust that they are going to be fair, that they are going to listen, that they are going to come in without an agenda and take the facts as they come. There's a lot of people that I think have made a living just in sports in general off sensationalizing and off of having a really significant agenda with the way that they cover things, the way they speak about things. And so just a lot of, like I said, a lot of the people in here are doing really good work in that space where maybe people who would have felt super uncomfortable or felt like for my own best interest, I can't talk about the situation because it could reflect on me negatively. We're moving towards a spot where maybe we aren't there yet, but we're moving towards a spot where I think people feel a little bit safer coming out and being able to talk about difficult situations because people do treat them more fairly.
Ooh, that's.
I do. Yeah, I think that that's great. And I wanted to bring back to what Ari was saying at the top about some of it also comes down to resources and
Mhm.
what and how you are potentially shooting yourself in the foot as independent media also,
Ah.
knowing that your opportunities could be taken away. And there are some instances where you can say, okay, I'm going to make a moral stand here, or this is a story, I can help platform this story. And I haven't been in situations like that personally, where a player has come up to me and said, I want to talk about something that, might not go over well, or whatever. And I would like to think that I would be able to put myself into a position that I would be able to help share that story. And I would like to build that trust to get to that point. But I can only speak to it so far because I haven't had that happen for me. But I thought it was great that Kennedy was able to talk to you guys and to tell her side of the story. And I think that that is absolutely what we need more of. And I think that that's something that we're seeing more in this social media era, as players are able to share their experiences and talk about what's happening in a way that doesn't always need to be positive, doesn't always need to have PR spin on it. And maybe it's also because women's sports are smaller in terms of what the following is, or like that bubble that I talked about here where it's on social media. But that can be used to its advantage because there are so many special interest stories, there are so many unique narratives that are happening that fans feel a lot closer. And I think that it's not just about, the ball going in the basket. Fans really feel a lot closer to so many of these athletes. And that access is something that a lot of us are able to have because of how small the space is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's why I always make it a point to ask questions that aren't the norm, like that have nothing to do with basketball half the time. Because it's made it a lot easier to ask those tougher questions. Like I was saying a little while ago, like that's where the relationships happen, where I'm asking, a coach about her socks, or I'm asking, Ryan and Leash, like, hey, did you play golf? Or asking Joel Lloyd about pickleball or whatever else. Like I'm asking that for a reason. Yes, hey, it lightens the mood, but I'm asking that so that they know I care. They know that, like, hey, I'm interested in who they are off the court, so that when I am writing about their on the court activities, they remember me, right? They remember those stories that I'm writing. Like, I'm always doing it with a purpose. I think it also adds framing, if you will, to a story. So it's not just a straight up like, oh yeah, this player does this, this, and this on the court. Like, you get to know that they're charismatic, or what they care about, or what's important to them. And I think that helps you. That helps you when you're writing those stories, so you can talk about those tough topics. But I would say that, like, my first experience, literally the first day that I ever covered the WNBA, was freelance. It was a blowout loss in New York Liberty, and Coach Wright had a viral clip where she criticized the officiating. And I posted that to my social media, not really thinking that it would like blow up the way that it did, but it got back to the team. And thinking back on it now, like, yeah, they could have revoked my creds, like, straight up. But I was an independent, writer, so there really wasn't a whole lot I think that they like were really upset about, because it was my first game, and all I did was kind of post like, hey, this is what she said, and that was really it. But it taught me an important lesson about framing, and why the W is very specific about the stories that get out. So I was, of course, to me, I came back. I really wanted to come back anyway, so that helps. But it wasn't just a one and done. I think that's what's important too. I've seen a lot of people come get these creds, and they do a couple of games and then they're out, and that's it. Or they use their creds in irresponsible ways, and that's it. So for me, it was more of a like, yeah, okay, wow, that was my first game, great, and I was stoked, and so I came back and kept coming back until I was there for the rest of the season. And so the great part about that is, once we, I think, yeah, Mark and I were both there at the exit interviews. Coach Wright came over to me and was like, hey, am I going to see you next season? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. So I plan on coming back. And that was all before I even started with USA Today. Like, this was going to be something coming my way anyways. Like, I knew once I got in the league circles, I was like, yeah, these are stories that deserve to be told in a proper way.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I'm a segment producer and guest coordinator for the number one morning show in Atlanta. It's the top news station, and I've been there now 5 years. 2 of those 5 years, I was home, working from home because of COVID. And I can honestly say there was not much coverage at all on the W, just women's sports in general. And I have made it my mission to be sure that we actually book the coaches,
book the players. I've had Coach Wright on twice now. I've had the president of the Dream on as well. I am working to get players, and just going back to what Meghan said about telling stories that are also off the court. Um, for Mother's Day, of course, I'm trying to, you know, have players on as well to show that, okay, on the court, they're dominant, but off the court, they're also moms. They're sisters. Like, there are things that go more into them just being women on the court, and like she said, to build those relationships and be like, wow, she's doing all that on the court, she's an all-star, and then she's going home and being a mom, and sometimes her child is even with her at practice, and just making it more intimate and making people want to support even more by telling different stories and seeing how outside of being a baller, they're also a human being. And I too think that does start with, them in college. And if you follow your favorite player from college and then into the W, of course you want to continue to see stories on them. So I've been doing a pretty good job at trying to keep up with the Dream and their free agency, making sure that we had stories on them, going to the players that have been selected for the Olympic trials, and just everything in general with the Dream. But also too, now we have the Atlanta Vibe. I know we're kind of talking about basketball, but just women's sports in general.
Yes.
Keeping up with the Atlanta Vibe as well. I've had the head coach, the president, and one of their star players on. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on her name right now because I'm trying to get
Probably
more
Tori.
familiar. Who was it?
Tori.
Yes, I'm trying to get more familiar with volleyball, but I wanted them on. Like, I don't know much. I'm learning more, but I feel like this is a sport that is growing tremendously, and everyone needs to know more about it and support these ladies. So this is something that can continue to grow and continue to be in the front court and not just be a dying sport because there wasn't enough support. So regardless of me knowing much about it or not, I know that people do love volleyball, and it deserves to be on television in front of thousands and thousands of people.
Period. I'm going to the home opener this week. So let's lighten the mood a little bit. You guys, y'all did a pretty good job of answering the next question. So we're gonna kind of skip through that. We talked about relationship building and how important it is. Y'all covered that. So my next question is gonna be something to lighten the mood. Talk about your experiences thus far. What is your favorite project or story you told in women's basketball? So kind of brag on yourself a little bit and tell me what's the best thing or your favorite thing that you've done in women's basketball.
Hi guys. I just wanted to first thank you for inviting me up on the panel. Um, I Before I answer that question, Lo, I wanted to say something, but you started talking. I didn't want to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to piggyback off of what Myles said about um, building relationships, especially through social media, and I want to credit the committee especially because I feel like what you guys have done is taken the reins over Twitter and created just like a new storm as far as like a different layer of access. And I feel like for me coming in, and I don't have a traditional sports background, so I was kind of emulating and going off of people that I knew that were in sports that came up the more traditional routes and other members of media, particularly the men's side, which is where I started for a little bit first. And a lot of it was building relationships with the teams. And what I found very quickly, especially the earlier days that I was covering the W in 2015, 14, 16, was that if you build a relationship with the players, you may not even need to necessarily build a relationship with the team. And when you build a relationship with the player and show interest in the player and they take interest in you, down the line, they're more likely to give you a story that might be exclusive or give you more information or open up to you a little bit more or your platform a little bit more versus a bigger platform like, a national platform, right? Um, and I think a lot of us media, then I can speak for myself particularly, I was really nervous about sometimes asking those tough questions because you're in a way kind of happy to just be able to get in the door.
Mm.
and get that level of access, and to be able to walk into the locker room. This is before when the locker rooms were open, or before, during shoot around, sit down next to a coach or sit next to somebody and talk, and you're afraid of pushing the envelope too far where now you're blacklisted and now that access cut off, and where else are you going to be able to find that? But now what I love with the community that is WNBA Twitter, seeing even TikTok is growing now, seeing Instagram, what it's always been, it's like media members are able to, and people coming into media, and it doesn't necessarily have to even be quote unquote media. It could just be a community, right? I feel the committee is more than just the media space. They've built a community, and players take heed to that, and that's why they were able to have conversation with Kennedy. And the one of the spaces I remember is when Delisha Milton Jones came on, and you know what I mean, like. So I just want to just credit you guys for that, because I think a lot of media coming up in the beginning, as Ari stated, like, it wasn't many of us, and I think we were just trying to survive and just trying to stay afloat and just trying to stay in the game, so that way, with more opportunities that will come in as the game grows, that we're still around, so that way, as the league grows, and the money that comes with growing the league, that we're not shut out.
I'm really proud of the audacity that y'all have. That's what me and Laureen, we couldn't have approached the league the way you all did, because back then, like I said, we get shut out. The community around women's basketball didn't exist in the way it does now. And what y'all are doing is y'all are igniting a group of people that haven't felt heard ever in this space. And because y'all aren't under the power of somebody else, always
Right.
maintain autonomy, because Lord help me, I could go on for days. But because y'all are able to not have to answer to any red tape or anybody, you can approach the game, I think, how it should be approached, in the raw, real way. And you can tap in to see what the actual people want to do. Whereas a lot of people would have a lot more parameters. But we can get back to Lowe's question. I'm not gonna start it off. I'll be in the middle of this. This ain't my space. So I'll let y'all answer it, but I just wanted to add to that while Lowe is talking. Other Lowe, not Lowe. Other Lowe.
I'll answer the question real quick. As far as like what I'm proud of and my, the time I've created beyond the W. Overall, just beyond the W in its existence, I'm very proud of, and I'm proud of it still going, because there's been times that I've wanted to let it go. And I'm proud of the community that we've built, our team as well. Akeem, Lamar, my husband helps as well. But I would say probably my first big story, my first big interview, which was with Maya Moore, was what I'm most proud of, because I remember the preparation that went into it. She was having a basketball camp in Westchester County, so right outside New York City. And she had two. It was one here in New York. Well, it was one in New York and one in Minnesota. And I remember in the preparation reaching out to the person that was throwing it. It was at a Lifetime Fitness. And they were like, "Oh yeah, no media is coming. You're the only person coming to cover it." And I'm proud of myself, because I felt like it was such a big moment, but I was able to stay level-headed and stay focused. And this is, again, beyond the W. Like, the website was still fresh. Like, I just launched it. My niece was my camera person at the time. She was like 16. And we went and I interviewed Maya Moore. I got to know her. Her mom was there. And we really got to capture the amazing work that she was doing with those kids, how well she interacted and taught those children the different drills, and how invested she was. Like, sometimes you see camps and they have a lot of other people helping out. So they might, jump in here, jump in there. Like, she was involved from the very beginning to end, and just capturing that side of her that was just so invested into the community and those kids, and how much those kids looked up to her, and also how gracious and how available she was to me. I think that was my first big piece, and that's the one that I will like always forget. I'll always never forget, and I'll always be proud of.
Ironically enough, I would say that would be the same person for me. I was able to book Maya Moore 48 hours after she announced her retirement on GMA with Robin Roberts and had her on the couch with us. Like I said, 48 hours later, technically being her hometown, this was like her first time doing an interview back in Atlanta. Of course, she graduated from Collins Hill High School. You know, still to this day, whenever people hear Collins Hill High School in Atlanta, they associate Collins Hill with Maya Moore. So having her on, and we did like the entire show was basically based around her. Usually when I do interviews, when we have interviews on the couch, they're usually just one segment about 5 minutes long. But for this one, it was about 15 to 20 minutes long. And we talked to her, went to break, came back and talked to her some more, and just seeing how happy she was, after announcing her retirement, but to just see the joy on her face too when we were showing old clips from when she was in high school. Like we had all the old tapes from back when she was in like 10th grade, and her knowing exactly what move she was about to do and everything like that for me brought back the kid inside of me, like seeing someone who I knew growing up, because she's only like a year older than me, but just seeing someone I knew, and that was like one of the first people for representation for me. It's like, wow, she's not that much older than me. Look at her balling on TV, and now, full circle moment for me, I'm booking her, to be on TV back here in Atlanta and reminiscing on times when she was playing here. So I would say that's the one I'm most proud of at this moment. But there is a big one that is prayerfully going to be coming up in the next couple weeks that I know is going to trump this one. And if I do get that one, y'all will definitely know.
You gonna get it, girl. It's already done. It's already written.
I'll just
Yeah, I would.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Go
Okay,
ahead,
okay,
Jamie.
I'll be quick. So little bit of context here. So Iowa State has been one of the most well attended college teams for, oh gosh, I mean, been top 5 for I think over a decade, been top 10 for maybe close to 20 years. And so I grew up not knowing that that wasn't normal. And I grew up around this community that watched me grow up there, because I was in the public eye with my mom. So all of a sudden here I become an adult and I'm covering women's basketball and I cover the Iowa State team. So all these people that already know me, already follow me, are following me even closer for that coverage. But Iowa is a state that does not have any professional, at least the highest level of professional sports teams. There's a couple of, minor league, whatever stuff, but they don't have those big teams, but they have a lot of people who love sports. And so when I really started talking a lot more about the W, especially when you get a couple of Iowa State players, a couple Iowa players, all that stuff, but even more so just discussing it on my own platforms, I had a bunch of people who all of a sudden would engage with me about it that I knew for a fact had not been talking about it before, had not been really following it prior. So just by continuing to discuss it and engage with people, I know that there's a whole bunch of people that have, at least to some degree, been following along with professional women's basketball and maybe even engaging with more college women's basketball outside of their own team as well. And so that's been really, really cool.
Yeah, I would say for me, it's actually kind of twofold. Last year, I was invited to attend Black Sports Business Symposium. If you guys have ever heard of that, sponsored by ESPN. It was here in Atlanta. Oddly enough, Maya Moore was at that conference as well. But I remember sitting on the field and listening to Maria Taylor actually talk, and she said something in her conversation that just kind of resonated with me very deeply. And she said, "It's okay to go left when your whole life you've been going right." And at that time, I was really trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, if I wanted to be in sports. And one of the things I really wanted to do was NFL. That's my first love. That was my passion. But I realized how hard it was to get there and how limiting it was. And so, but I really had a story. I really had a passion to want to tell stories in the right way. And I remember meeting a gentleman there who was asking me, what I was doing, where I was going, what I wanted to do. So I told him, and he said to me very like straight face, and he's like, WNBA, he's like, they need good people like you to tell stories. And so I sat on it, and a couple weeks later, ran full force. Started my own freelance company, and that's how I got to start with covering the Dream. But all of that led to where I am now, which is USA Today. And one of the best things that I did, the first big WNBA interview I did was Kelsey Plum. And that was right after the Aces had won the championship. It was about maybe 2-3 weeks, not even that long. And that was a dope interview to do because she was so personable. And I was terrified because I'm like, holy cow, like this is a big deal for me. But it was awesome because, again, when you say relationships, when you say asking the right questions, I just kept it really light. And I think probably the thing that sealed it for me is I just was, I asked her things I thought fans would want to know, like, how did y'all get Jackie to tweet? And tell me what you're going to do in the offseason, things like that. And she was just super personable. And I think for me, that was when I knew I could do this. All that doubt, all the self-worry that I had for months and months and months, even after I landed here, it all kind of melted away once I put that story out. And I think part of that was just me just having someone who was willing to, work with me, of course, and letting me tell their story in a way that served them well.
I'll go. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Ari, you got it.
Nope, Myles, go ahead.
I was just going to say that so many of my moments, and I've never really kind of thought about it through this perspective, but it's been stuff that hasn't happened on the court, which is really strange. But it's a lot of the like little community moments. Like I remember Dee Dee Richards last winter doing an event at Dick's Sporting Goods where she was trying on clothes with kids and giving away gift cards and just engaging with the community like that. Or I grew up in Brooklyn and I had never been to the Empire State Building before going with the WNBA because that's where the draftees go in the morning. But I went twice this year because Jonquel Jones it was the Bahamas 50th anniversary and she was there to change the colors of the Empire State Building. And after she flips the switch to change the colors that night, we go up top and it was me and only one other media member, Brian Florentin, who does great work with the Liberty too. And JJ, before she answered any questions, she was like, just take a minute and like look at where we are. Look at what we're doing. And that was just such a cool moment for me. I mean, seeing Asia Wilson pouring champagne down her dad's throat like after they win the championship on the Barclays court, like practice court, after just what a phenomenal game that was. There were so many tiny little moments like that that have really resonated with me and have become the lead of some stories at some point. But yeah, it's very rarely just the who set a screen at the last minute and who hit that final shot. So I've just been very lucky and privileged. I covered something at the Tribeca Film Festival through this league, and those moments are when I can kind of take a step back because when the game is happening, you're locked in on that. But you really see the players outside of the lines, I think, a lot more. And being able to share those stories has been really, really fulfilling.
Myles, you just like literally unearthed so many memories. I love that. And I know that we started this off talking about our grievances, but just there is so much reward in growing with a league that's its infancy into popularity because we get those experiences that you can't pay for because we see the players coming into their own. We see the firsts that a lot of leagues got back in the 80s because they had rights, and we see the investment increase over the years, whereas like another sport that's not predominantly black or predominantly queer won't get um the funding or the buy-in. So thanks for mentioning those intangibles because they are super important. My examples are I have two that I remember vividly. Like one's an initiative and another is a story. I Back when I was with my company, I partnered with Zell, and we did this initiative called Her Home Court, where we would create murals of players who we felt were deserving, and have it at something with like youth basketball that dealt with them. So my most prized one was Sylvia Fowles. And I'm so glad because they were thinking of somebody else, and I was like, nah, how about Sylvia? And it was like a big, like, I'm not showing up unless it's Sil type of thing. So that was great that I can exert that privilege in a way that people will take me seriously. But we went to Miami and got to go to like her neighborhood and paint the mural, and her AAU team, the Miami Suns, got to be out there. And uh, her mom's name is Loretta, and everybody, all the neighbors were like looking like Loretta, like kept running up to her and just like embracing her, because I guess she hadn't been back in a while. So it was a big family reunion, and she got to see herself, and she got to be honored in a way that I think that she should have been. And I really wish that it would have been promoted better, because it was a really monumental moment. So the Her Home Court initiative that I did in 2021 and 2022 was my most prized project. But as far as the interview, Tierra Ruffin Pratt, the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, um, she trusted me telling her story about how her cousin was murdered in the hands of the police her draft night. And um, just being able to be vulnerable and open up like that, because you never really get over that, right? And being still active, because back then she was on the Sparks at the time. She told me that back then you're still having to show up and play in your skin for a country that doesn't necessarily value your skin and value you as a human. So she opened up about that in a very fragile time, and just knowing that hit home for her. And I know nobody had asked her about it like that before. So um, I'm just honored and privileged to have the trust of players like TRP to tell those stories.
Yeah, just to chime in, I loved your project with Sil. That's one of my favorite things that I've ever gone through and watched. I remember like whenever I'm like doing a feature on somebody, I go and I find everything I can on them. And I think like watching that, not just the gas, but that's like the most I think I've ever seen a player feel like gratified in something is seeing Sil get to do that. So I just want to say again, like that was
Oh
the shit,
my,
Ari.
thank you.
Um, I promise I'm going to answer the question, but I did just kind of want to like roundabout real quick because Jamie hit on something that I thought was really good earlier before I could talk, and I think it's difficult because part of for me, like I mean, I'm 20. I'm not trying to make this an age thing, but I'm 26, and I feel like I'm still kind of figuring out what I do and who I am in this space, as much as anyone else is, you know, and like so I think for me, it's just difficult because that's always evolving. I think I came in with a very different idea of what I was going to do. I thought it was just going to be strictly basketball stuff, and that's evolved into a lot more of like building relationships and doing feature driven stuff. And I think especially too, like I mean, I technically work for the league, so it changes what you can and can't do and say, of course. And um, not that that means that you should just always be like, you know, willy nilly and free PR or whatever. But I think, you know, it's just always about trying to keep that in mind because that's something I've had to learn for sure. But no, I think, again, just so much of the learning process of figuring out, you know, who I am and what I do and what I bring to stuff is um, that's, I feel like I'm still figuring that out. But I think for me, like, learning through the process of getting to know people is what was really special because I'll never forget like I was never going to be somebody who ever did features. I didn't want to do that. I didn't think I was cut out for that. I was like, all right, I can just do play breakdowns and stuff. And um, Subria gave me the opportunity to interview Brittany Sykes, and it was more like I got the opportunity to do it, but my manager was like, no, you got to do this. I was like, okay, I have no idea how to do this. I've never done a feature before, and um, I don't know. It just became like watching and getting to know every player through their games um, without really knowing anything about them. I was like, how is Alyssa Thomas a top 10 player in the league and I don't know anything about her? Like, and that kind of stuff spurs me on. Like, I want to learn more about people. I want to understand those things. Like, I think there's a very important lane, of course, for people breaking news and being around that. But I just, in full honesty, like that is not what I'm not cut out to do that. And I'm not comfortable doing it in some ways. Like, obviously there's room to ask important questions and be tough. But I think for me, it's been finding that like having players who are willing to be vulnerable about their lives. And I think for me, like I've kind of, I mean, I'd like at least be able to hope that I feel like players have been able to feel that with me and be comfortable in some ways because of how I carry myself and how I approach things. And again, like I'm not saying that's the model for everyone. That's just how it works for me. And And yeah, I mean, to me, it is that piece I did on AT, and getting down to Auburn recently to cover DB's jersey retirement, like just getting to see these people celebrated for the great things that they've achieved. And like, I mean, DB said herself in Auburn, she's like, this is the first time that I ever feel like I've had my career really get celebrated, or like, have it really be about me, and not in a selfish way, but it's like, you think about it, like she's been at the top of basketball since she was a high school All-American coming out of Fairfield in like 2006. Um, and everything's always been about her team, and understandably, but like this is the first time that she had really felt like, I'm being awarded for what I've done and accomplished in my career. And so getting to see those moments and like just see how much it meant to her, seeing the way that she interacted with all those people who have watched her since she was, 16 years old, like that's why I do it. That's why I love it, and that's why I think it keeps me around.
That's like, I just want to add really quickly, but Mark, the intention that you put behind it to know these things. Like, I see Subria in the audience who was really, really pushing Dewana's story. I know committee, you all are in it, so y'all know these stories that are untold. If you are not paying attention to the landscape of the game, you wouldn't know that Dewana's story needs to be told. You wouldn't know that Alyssa is amazing because poor baby, like, had the year of her life and won't walk away with an individual award at all, which, Lord. But
Don't
I,
stop.
like, Duncan, not today, not today, not today.
Don't
But
do it.
you wouldn't know unless you're actually paying attention. And like I hinted at it when I was talking about the her home court. Like, thank God for, like, I see Jaren in the audience. Thank God for people who are within bigger organizations that can be like, hey, no, let's not take the easy route. Let's pivot to these players who haven't been seen. And so if you don't have a Mark, a committee, a Jaren, a Sabria, a Low, like anybody that's not saying, hey, maybe we should look over here because y'all are over here, then these stories aren't going to be told.
That's literally the best segue. So this next question is, so what is independent media? I feel like a lot of we y'all know us, when ESPN or whomever, whatever major media outlet does something outlandish, we call it out, you know and I think all of us in this space, including the committee, have done our due diligence to provide alternate perspectives and alternate stories in smaller spaces. So what is independent media, and why should fans support independent media?
I think I'll say this. This is just coming from someone who went from that side to, I guess you could say, big media outlet. But I think the thing is your lens is different, right? Like you have an unbiased lens, and that's not to say like hey, that's not any shade against anyone with a different lens, but from an independent outlet, you can kind of cover a little bit more ground, I think, and be able to say what kind of what you want. Like I mentioned earlier, that little clip that I posted, like I wouldn't be able to do that, now if I wrote for the league or things like that. Like the league kind of reins things in. So I think, in my opinion, like you've got a little bit more freedom to kind of say what you need to, and of course in a respectful way, but say what you need to or cover more things. I think, if I'm being honest, like I still try to keep that lens now, even though I work for USA Today. I try to keep that lens at all times, just making sure that I keep my head on a swivel for things that need to be called out, or things that I feel like are unjust. I'll say this: I wrote a couple pieces in the last year that I really like held my breath when I wrote them and showed my editors. But I will say this: working for the Win has greatly helped my ability to be confident in writing things that may not be the popular thing. Like I wrote about ESPN showing too much of Chelsea Gray's injury. I wrote about Kim Mulkey and her treatment or lack thereof with Angel Reese. And when I showed that to my editors, by the way, this is no slight to my editors, but my editors are all, mostly white folks. They were like, hey, go for it, Meg. We fully support you, and this is fine. They've encouraged me to, take up that space for girls that look like me or may not look like me. And I felt comfortable being able to do that. So I think it's just all about like having the correct support system around you and people who aren't afraid to say the things that need to be said.
And y'all think for a second that all y'all aren't in somebody's tweet deck giving inspiration to these bigger companies. They know who y'all are. I also want to shout out Mel. I didn't even see her. Mel with Made for the W. When I tell you I've seen her journey and having to pivot and do all the things that like nobody should have to endure to create stories is beautiful. But the tenacity that independent outlets have. What is independent media? That y'all are fitting for yourselves to do great work, telling great stories, and it's necessary because what it does, especially if you can cultivate a community, you put the pressure on larger companies because they can no longer ignore the demand. The demand is there. And I would challenge the audience is what I tell you everybody on every podcast I've ever been on. If you are begging for more women's sports coverage, but you don't retweet, you don't consume, you don't talk about your favorite independent outlets, it's never going to hit on a bigger company. It's just not. It's not because they're going to not see that it's there. They just see y'all complaining. They just see y'all complaining and they're like, oh, they're annoying, but they can't say like these numbers are there to back it. So if you see a Mark like watching his film, I don't even know how you watch that much freaking film, Mark. It's exhausting, really. But like posting it, like retweet it. If you see the committee have a space, retweet it. If you see Miles' article, B. Terrell's pictures, Lo regenerating her site, Meghan's articles, like you really should be. And Jamie, whatever you do, yes, girl. But like you all should be supporting everybody who's doing this for intentionally, because if not, these bigger companies are going to be like, nobody wants it. They're going to be like, nobody wants it, and you can't be like, but they do. And they're like, okay, show me numerical proof, because I think very black and white too. I'm like, is the demand there, yes or no? Like, you got to think like a white man who's giving you millions of dollars. You just have to, because why would you pay millions of dollars for something that doesn't generate any traffic, any interest? It just doesn't work that way. And we can live in la la land as much as we want, but the hard truth is that the numbers have to talk.
When I think of everything Ari said, by the way, but when I also think of independent media, I think of people who started their prospective platforms for a specific reason. They saw a need and they said, I want to be the change that I want to see. I want to create something that I don't see. A lot of independent media that I've met are people who are, whether they have a background in sports or not, they either branch off and start their own thing, or they may have a completely different career. And the beauty, I think, in independent media versus more traditional national or even local is the ability and the freedom to kind of create your own voice and create your own, not your own narrative, but you know what I mean? Like, you can have the story written and given out to the masses the way that you want to. I have freelanced for different platforms before, like here or there, and I have submitted one thing, and what was published on the site is a completely different thing because it has to fit the voice of that platform or that story that they want to say the way that they want to say it. And sometimes your voice gets lost in that translation, and it may not be, it comes with the territory. But I think the beauty about the independent media, which is also a little bit of a fine line, and it can tie into some of the negativity that I think the league wants to avoid. But the beauty is that freedom of speech, that freedom to kind of say what you want and write a story the way that you want to, hone in on certain things that you want to. If you want to focus on one particular player and the way that they've been playing for this amount of time to this amount of time, you can do that. And you may not have and if you have an editor or somebody who is over you that will give you that runway to do what you want to do, that's even better, right? Like with Beyond the W, Akeem has been writing for us for a long time, and I gave him the keys, and I may check for grammatical stuff, but I give him the keys, and I trust him, and I trust his voice. And that's the beauty, I think, with more independent outlets. And like Ari said, support independent outlets as much as you can, because when we do want to try to apply for grants or for opportunities or partnerships or deals, every person counts, right? I remember one time I was speaking to someone who worked at Foot Locker, and I reached out just like an inquiry because I wanted to try to do a brand collab. And she said something that was really, it opened my eyes a little bit more, because I was so focused on the numbers, right? I'm like, I don't have 10, I don't have 100,000 followers, or I don't have 200,000 followers, and she's like, yeah, but your small site is small, so you having 10,000 followers will probably have more engagement and more impact than a bigger platform that has 1 million followers. And so for independent media and independent journalists too, that might be freelancers and they work for multiple places and their primary voices may be a Twitter or maybe a TikTok, every retweet, every follow, every every story every time you click on their website, and it counts as one other person who visited that website and one person who watched the video from beginning to end. Everything matters so intricately, and that could be the difference between someone getting a grant that might be $1,000. Guess what? That $1,000 can be a upgraded camera that can create even better camera quality, better quality content that can now make their stuff look even more legitimized. So I just behoove you guys to really there's so many voices here. B. Terrell and his amazing work, Ari and her amazing work, the committee, Mel with, Made for the W. There's so much, there's so Subria, there's so many people here and people that will come in the future. So I just say, just as much as we gravitate towards our, whatever platforms you like, ESPN or Sports Illustrated, rest in peace, make sure that you support each and every person here too.
Yeah, just to weigh in on that too, because that's something that I've had to learn as I've gotten more into what. So like technically now, so I still work for the W, but my main job is working for a company called 7 Star Digital, which is like it's a startup that does a lot of stuff. It's kind of like trying to be like Action Network HQ. But point being, like our networks, like any of our websites, do not rank super highly in SEO right now, and it doesn't. Not to get like super nitty gritty with that, but point being, like ESPN has like 3 or 4 W journalists, and they're going to get 97 to 98% of the clicks if you search something on Google. So I think like when you're talking about independent media, that's the biggest difference for me. Like the voices, that doesn't change. Like in terms of like the level of voice doesn't change, but the level of amplitude does. Um, when you're outside the circles, because I think for me, one of the things that I've kind of reshaped my mind around recently is like it's really easy to get caught up in the bubble of the W community without factoring in the casual fan. And I think especially as the next couple of years keep hitting and the new deal hits with ESPN, um, I think the casual fan is going to become even more important in terms of just talking about things in general, because that is like whether or not that's what we want, like that is what drives things. Like those are the vast majority of eyes, the vast majority of people who are clicking on things are casual fans. And I think again, like that's what makes it really difficult to be independent media. If you do not have the ability to connect at a strong level with the casual fan, even if it's just like you might have great things to say, but if people never see it, it is really hard to do that. So I think just again, hitting on what everyone else has said, like sharing and amplifying and interacting with is like it just goes such a long way. Like it is so important to get, because that, I mean, anytime you have a meeting with editors or anybody who is in control of the site, they do not see impact. They see numbers, they see link clicks, they see how many times somebody retweeted something. Like that's what they see. They're not, there are some great editors and stuff who are going to see it otherwise, but again, when it comes down to the people at the top, that is not what they see. They're never going to see it that way. um, and so again, it cannot go underrated how important it is to actually support the people who are doing it.
And
This conversation, sorry, this conversation has been kind of eye opening for me too, because I have just been buried in it, in this independent space so long that like I've forgotten about kind of the privilege that it is to pitch a story, and 99% of the time you're going to get a yes, and that 1% will be like, okay, but how can you draw this back to the court? Like I still like the idea, but we need a little more from it. And that's largely been my experience. um, and that being said, I agree with what everyone is saying about how important it is for this independent media to exist. But I don't think that we should shy away from the conversation of everyone is basically doing this as a passion job, largely for free. In lots of cases, I will say in my own case, it cost me money to cover the WNBA. I make approximately $30 a month to cover it as a second full-time job on top of my regular full-time job. And I have to pay my own way to travel to All-Star, to finals. And it's so great that I have the credentials and that I'm able to cover that and bring whatever small piece of myself into that narrative. But it's really not a sustainable thing for a lot of people. And I don't want to glorify the grind. The grind is not good. Like, this should not be how things are. And I think that that's the mistake that we get, that happens a lot of the time, where people praise, as media members, we never want to put ourselves out there, which is why, it's even difficult for me to have that aspect of the conversation. But I think it's important to have in the full context of what it means to be independent media. Is it means that you are just not going to be sleeping when you're in season. You're going to be thinking about what your next idea is 5 ideas ahead. You're going to be constantly just grinding for access. You have to send 10 emails to get an invite to something, to know if you could then spend a lot more money of your own to go book a hotel, go book a flight. You'll have to rearrange your whole life. And I don't think that this is like a martyr thing. I just think that I wanted to bring a little bit of balance, because it's been really difficult. It's put a lot of pressure on relationships of mine too. And I think that that side doesn't often get talked about. And part of that is because we want to be behind the lens. We want to be behind the camera. We want to be out of the story. Um, but that's a big effect of not having any of this financial backing too.
So then follow up is, with for those that can answer, do you believe the WNBA could do a better job of supporting independent media? Because in a sense, you guys are the ground or the base for what people see of the W. Like, if we want to know more about players and they're, reaching out to you guys to write stories and say certain things, if they don't give you guys the space to write full content that reaches casual fans, do you feel like that is handicapping everyone in a sense?
I think that conversation goes back to when we talk about the perspective of some of these big outlets, right, that have to look at numbers. And
Yeah.
the W as a business owes it to these players to try to platform their stories at the largest places possible. So I think that that's part of what goes into it. Um, I understand that there's limited space, right? I understand that when only 30 media members, there's only room for 30 media members, that the ones that will have the largest platforms need to make sure that they get access and they get to eat first. Like, I understand how that works, because at the end of the day, it is a business. And if we're going to get to the point that we want to get to, that all of those numbers and metrics and all the things that go way over my head, all of that needs to be hit. Um, but I do wish that there were more opportunities. I do wish that it wasn't an uphill battle to have these conversations at all. Um, and that's definitely a roadblock that I've run into. And I also know that, I started covering the league in 2019. I was credentialed starting 2020. So, like, a lot of people have been waiting to have this conversation a lot longer than I have too. So I definitely am not at the front of the line for that either.
I think as having covered the league independently, like I, I mean, I don't know. I feel like I probably had a little bit of a different experience because the Dream were so friendly to me. Liam, the PR coordinator, was the one who actually credentialed me, not even the PR manager. And I think a lot of it was just because, like, hey, he was like, hey, this person is interested and they're showing interest, but I kept, showing back up. But talking to other people, realizing like that was not the case for a lot of other folks, right? Like they didn't have the opportunities that I did. So to Miles's point, this conversation is opening my eyes, because I've been really blessed to be able to do that and to continue doing that as, independently. But I think Mark talked about it, a couple minutes ago, is that, like, yeah, I mean, I had been writing articles all summer on the Dream, and I'm not really sure how much traction that it really got until I started going to, USA Today. And I think that really kind of broke my heart a little bit, because I'm like, listen, there's some really good stories I wrote here, and some good quotes, and there are a lot of good people in those rooms who are telling stories. And it just makes me, kind of sad a little bit that, there's so many people who are working so hard, who are giving their all to it, who are paying their own way for things, not to have their stories amplified the way that it should be. And so I think, it does go back to that conversation of, can you write for the casual fan? And I think that's what I try to do now. Is I typically write for people who may not be sports fans, who may not know the W or anything else like that. And that's also the reason why I've asked the same question to several different players, is like, hey, if someone's never watched the WNBA before, what would you want them to know about the league? And I think the answers have been varying, but it's been mostly like, hey, that we're players, hey, that we are more than our jerseys, we're people, those sort of things. So I always kind of think back to that when I am writing, through my own outlet, of like, how can I tell that story in a more positive way, that's impactful and that puts some sort of footprint, down.
Yeah, as someone who works in a top 10 news market, but also is in the umbrella of a $1 billion media company, I'm going to just put it in perspective this way. As I mentioned earlier, we're the number one morning show in Atlanta. More people in Atlanta watch us than they watch Good Morning America, meaning that if we want people to see more about women's basketball, then you start with your smaller media entities, because think about it, more people are on Facebook, especially older people. So people are on Facebook. If they see this person who's constantly writing about the WNBA on Facebook and they follow them, they see that first before they see something on a national media outlet. And just knowing what we look for at work sometimes, it's okay, this was trending on Facebook. Look at what's on my timeline. Like, these people are talking about this. We need to see if we can find this person to have them on with us. That's the type of things that you have to look at, and the things that I think the W should look at as well. Like, I get it. You want GMA, you want the Today Show, but you have to remember that a lot of these fans, they don't give a damn about that. Excuse my language, y'all. They don't care about that. They care about what they can see in their community first. And then if they see it in their community first, and then it's on national, like, yeah, well, I saw this here at home, and then look where they are now. And it makes them feel closer to it as well because they saw it at home first.
That makes sense.
I have a because y'all know I have to be kind of in the middle with this, or I don't have to be. I'm choosing to be because, and it's not neutral. Let's just keep that very clear. I think that there's displaced thoughts with team versus media. So when Meghan was talking about how she's had great success with Atlanta supporting her, the individual markets have the capability of pushing your stories. I know Jiggy does a great job of this with the Aces, because he puts in his roundup for media all the articles that have been written about the particular team. So
Ah,
there's individual entities, and then you have to question as a whole the distrust that people have historically had within the WNBA, because I do think that marketing has made eons of progress with trying to make it available for media members, and giving access to media members, and pulling into a salaried or into a compensated way the people of the community, and trying to push forward with that. A lot of us want to, you know, not be mad, because mad and frustration are valid, but the league isn't as closed off to pitching ideas as you would think. They just need to be pitched, and they don't have a problem with compensating if it's bought. Do you know what I mean? So like, those who have great ideas, be careful with it. Be careful with it. But just know that there are ways to communicate constructively with the larger entity that is the league, because now they've had a very big refresher from 2019. We all know the dark days. We all know the dark days. We've been through them. Well, half of us have been through them. Those are over. Now they have a younger staff involved, and that 75 million that was given to the league was to get a staff that can live independently from the NBA. But as far as pushing stories, because a lot of them with the beat writing is going to be local, I challenge teams are where we should be looking at, and that's relationships with PR. That's the access points. A lot of, like, you wouldn't even know. Like, I experienced it myself, and I was on the short end of the stick, believe it or not, for finals, because we were left credentialed through the teams. It's not the overall league. And so um I know Sabria got more to say on this, but I just want to a lot of like the media coverage slantedness, we're mad at networks, right? A lot of the pushing promotion, we're mad at teams. And yes, you can have your grievances with the league itself. That's by all means warranted. But there's so many layers to this of like who controls what that y'all might not be aware of as a whole. Not y'all, but like all of us as a community.
I just want to add one thing real quick, and I promise I'm going to give you the floor, Subria. I promise. Just real quick, I don't know if you remember this, Ari, but like like when I first started with Beyond the W and covering the league and everything, I remember at the bottom of the website or somewhere on the website, it had like a WNBA, like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it was
Mm-hmm.
like voices or
Mm-hmm.
something. And it was certain media companies that were like almost like partners of the league. And it was
Mm-hmm.
the ESPNW. I think XL Sports. I don't think XL Sports exists anymore. It was a few of them, and I
Mm-hmm.
remember I would never forget. My sole goal was to make that list, to be
Mm-hmm.
that exclusive, whatever it was, with the league. It's since gone away, and I can't really say I know the full breadth of what that was, but I would love to see the league bring something back or something similar, or maybe like a refreshed idea of partnering with certain outlets, not just your big ones, but your independent ones that are very consistent, that are, you know, they're like your, like, I'll throw W Insider in there, for example. Like, I would love to see the league partner with platforms again, um, to maybe feed them certain exclusives, or to also give light and give opportunity to those independent websites, as well as the ones that we, go to, like your ESPNs and everything like that. But I don't know what happened with that. I don't know what came of that. I don't know if that was intentional to remove it or if it's evolved, but I remember that very vividly because my goal was like, Beyond the W is going to be on the bottom of that page, or when you hit that down drop that on the menu and you see that our name is going to be there, and it's since gone away. But go ahead, Sabria.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just I'm weak at already like knowing I was gonna have something to say, because what I wanted to come up here and say to Dolores, your question about the W, and instantly I was like, well, who? Do you mean the teams or do you mean the league? And I would like to see the league be more intentional about setting the tone for the teams. And I even want them to be more intentional, like beyond the all-star or beyond playoffs. Like, if you know that a highlight her is coming and they're doing social media, you need to make sure that they have the credential seats closest to the court, because that is the type of content that they're putting out there, versus the big name who is there to write an article and they don't actually need to be there. Like, being more intentional about that, being more intentional about including everyone. And I've been saying, like, please make a new system where you are able to include those who are doing the social media content or the influencer types, and versus writers, and just make it so that everyone has a clear lane and that they can have the resources that they need, and you can, I guess, impose your parameters based on that so that you feel comfortable. But I just would really like to see the league be more intentional and kind of include, I guess, teams or markets specifically in conversations, to where at least there's some type of baseline for what different writers can expect, to kind of level the playing field. And I also want there to be more clarity between publicity and public relations. Like, I think we need to figure out, what do they want from public relations, because a lot of the part that they are missing be the relations and the relationships with the public, that goes beyond media and publicity, but showing up for those who are showing up for you, and acknowledging them, and making people feel valued. And maybe that's not an exclusive. Maybe that's just simply liking a tweet or saying, hey, I see this, thank you. I just want to see, I guess, more of that. um and really kind of propping up those who are doing the work, and what everyone has said about people spending their own money, not having the money. Like, just really pay attention to your community and not alienating the people who are basically holding y'all down.
It's funny because as we talk about the Sabri, what you said about like those who are in social versus those who are writing, we have to realize too, like social media influencing is like so new in the grand scheme of things. And so to implement a system within a company, it's taken some time and a lot of convincing, right? Like we're the young people and we know that some people have been in the NBA office for a long time, even though WNBA is fairly new as an independent office. But I think that now it's going to be a clearer cut of influencer versus social versus writers. But you remember the discourse that we had, I think, last summer about who does what? Like, I think that as soon as we can categorize the functions of everybody, like if we're this confused about what we do, then how are we gonna convince the league like, no, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this, and the significance of it. Again, it shows with numbers. It shows with like an adaptive system of like society because people are just now understanding the scope of like or the impact of an influencer or the impact of a writer, the impact of somebody who does like social. They're three very different jobs. They can cross over. You can have people doing more than one thing. Let's be honest. We can walk and chew gum, right? If you are good at both, you can be both. But I think the league is going to implement a system that does do the separation like you were talking about. But at first, it was just so convoluted because it was like a free for all. They went from this is a league that went from no coverage to so much coverage in a span of what, 3 years? That's hectic. Great, but hectic. And so if I'm an older person not understanding social at all, I'm sitting in confusion for a couple months because I'm like, what is this? What is the point? So I think that we've gotten enough attention that like in our independent fields that like we can show the point of it all. And now that they can start making moves accordingly.
Bet. So, and to wrap this up, because again, it's Sunday and I know y'all want to get y'all's lives going, but if everyone's interested, we can definitely do this again because there definitely is a lot of things that went unanswered or we could have gone more thorough in. But to wrap this up, what would be one hope or one thing you want to see this season, this WNBA season? In your role, like whether it be from the W, whether it be just something that you want to happen or something that you're looking forward to this season.
I want as women's sports just in general starts continues to generate more income, continues to generate more sponsorships, investment. I want to see it trickle down to independent media. I want to see it trickle down to freelancers. I want to see it trickle down to the influencers, those who continue to push the stories forward, those who maintain and create communities. I want to see us, everyone that's in this panel. I want to see on this panel and everyone who's listening who wants to or is already doing it to get a piece of that pie because the bigger of a piece of pie we get, we can invest more time into it too. We can invest more of our energy into it too and create even better quality product and quality conversation as well. It's all about the game, but we have to survive as well. So I want to see that money trickle down to those of us as well. That's what I would like. It may not happen all in one this season, of course, but starting this season, moving forward, that's the dream that I have, and what I want to see.
So my goal is I'm gonna keep doing what I do. Period. I'm gonna keep booking. I'm gonna keep doing whatever. My motto is book first, ask for forgiveness later. So I'm going to keep doing that. However, I am also going to try and get into my sports team's ear and have them do the work as well. Because yes, Good Day is Good Day. That's morning television. But sports, High Five Sports, is what people see in the evening, what people see at night. And we need continuous coverage throughout the day, not just in the morning. You also need it for those who at night watch the news before they go to bed. So my goal for myself is to get my sports team to start giving these women more coverage. That's with college all the way to the W.
I have a couple of things, but first I wanted to piggyback off of what Subria was saying, because I think that's a very actionable thing that could happen this year, is to have the league and the teams engage more with some of the smaller publications to help to grow, because that will grow everybody. But on a personal level, last year I took a big swing. Owen Pence and I started our own podcast, and I don't love speaking. I don't like, I write because I don't want to be in front of a room speaking. But that was a big thing for me to kind of get comfortable with, and we were so proud of how that went last year. And I just want to see that continue to grow. I want us to be more consistent with that, and to have some of the biggest names in the sport. That's what I want to try to work up to when I'm setting a goal for myself this year, because like Ari was saying, there are lots of different hats. And what I think is happening now, though, is that you can't just wear one anymore. You can't just be a writer and try to break into this space. You can't just do a podcast. You can't just do social media. And I think that like that's helpful for getting me out of my comfort zone, and kind of helping me be more rounded, more well rounded. And I think that that's what's going to hopefully help some of these bigger organizations take notice too.
For me, I definitely want to be personally more intentional with finding ways that the things that I do tend to cover more. So, Big 12, things like that, crossing that over with things like the WNBA to continue to try to expand maybe people's awareness there. And then on the flip side of that, I would really like for the league to continue to capitalize on those opportunities. I think back to this past season, what the Fever did in engaging with their communities of fan bases that are known to really follow the players that they have on their team. They had a couple of theme nights around it where you had South Carolina hat nights there, you had an Indiana hat night there, and just even fairly small things like that. But continuing to find those kind of crossover opportunities where it's like, okay, if you like this, you might like this other thing. If you like women's basketball, there's a good chance you'll like different levels of that play. But how can we get those to appeal more and come more to where those fans are?
In the same boat, I want to see the league tap into more opportunities, like more, and have more crossovers outside the W space. Like, I'm super glad that they're like leaning into the collegiate crossovers and having those things, but I want to see more with WWE, National Women's Soccer League. Like, go out and find those crossovers in other leagues and other teams and other celebrities to bring them to where you are, and not just limiting yourself to the fans who are probably, I guess, like already in the room. And I really want to see them, in addition to adding those new partners, I want to see them see their own worth and start choosing partners who actually care about them and actually like them and actually support them. Because we're every single season we're having a conversation about certain partners that clearly do not care to promote their own product or their own partnerships with the W. And so I just want them to be more intentional about mutually beneficial relationships and less about, I guess, the names or clout.
Personally, I want more viewership for Off Top, because that could be better. And if y'all want to watch it, it's on the app and it comes on Ion before WNBA on Friday, but Off Top is on the app. So please show the league that like stories deserve to be told. And for the grand scheme of things, this isn't necessarily a league critique. This is like everybody who's listening to this. I want everybody, because I've seen some of the comments as we were talking about like, you want to start in this space, just start, right? So like Lowe's started her own website about Laureen, sorry, started her own website about basketball and was able to like work with her, family and things like that to make it happen. And the longevity is crazy. I started from a phone, hitting up my friends and meeting at their hotel rooms when they came to New York, and like look what it grew into. If you don't just start what you have the vision for and occupy that blank space that you see, it's never going to be fulfilled, right? Like people don't know the vision that you have for your work, and you can be the missing puzzle piece to really help this thing just go off, like really pop for real. And so like you see it with what has been created here. Whose form are we on right now? They saw something that was missing and they did that shit, and like it popped. And so like you never know what could pop. So please write down your goals, execute them as best as you can. You don't need multi-millions of dollars to start. Get your reps in. If you want to be a broadcaster, put your phone up, read the teleprompter app, like record yourself, get those reps in, then figure out how to show up. And I encourage everybody to show up in these spaces, like really be present within the game. Get to know the team PR so that you can be at, like, say if you're in Atlanta, so that you can have a great experience like Meghan does with Atlanta Dream, like so that you can have a great experience with the closest team to you, and start writing on the beat. Like start like not the beat, but like be a beat writer. You know what I mean? Like cover the teams and do it your way, and so that you can show that there's space for it.
And to that end, I know that I'm not where I want to be yet, but I also know that I'm not at the start, and that there are some people that want to get into this media space. And I've been lucky to have people reach out to me via DM, and we jump on a Zoom for a couple of minutes, and I can talk about what I've done and what my journey is, or if there's anyone I can link them with. So if you have any more specific questions, just feel free to reach out. I won't speak for everybody, but feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to just have those conversations and help you start on your way.
Well, y'all are super dope. Thank y'all so much for this spaces. I think it was the perfect background for a lot of people who have a lot of questions. And with free agency happening but not happening right now, it was nice to talk to some of the people that might know where our favorite players are going really soon. My hope is that we will get more information. And I think that was a big reason why I wanted to have this roundup, was because a lot of times we don't know who to blame when we don't get the information. And I think fans, including myself, because even though I have the committee and we operate in this space now, I think the beautiful thing about what we do is that we can still keep the fan aspect, which allows us to speak from a more well-rounded space in this. But I think wanting to know, and I think that's what so many W fans and so many casual fans struggle with, is just like not having the information and not knowing who to go to for it. So just know that if you're listening to this space, it is recorded, and they just told you what they can and can't answer based on what they do and don't do. So we know not to yell and curse at them. But thank y'all so much for doing this with us. We really appreciate it. Please, please, please support these talented people in the space. They all are pretty dope and pretty awesome in their own right, and support their content just like you support ours. But thank y'all, and we hope to do this again soon.
Thank y'all.
Thank you guys. Continue to do the great work.
All right, bye.
Period.
Thank you, everyone.